Welcome to this video with DPP Planning. Talking to me today is Bob Robinson, Director of the National Independent Planning Consultancy. Bob joins me to discuss activity in the education sector and whether the COVID-19 pandemic has had any impact on the programme of creating new school places in England and Wales. Bob, hello.
Hello.
How active has DPP been in the education sector in the past year, and how does that compare to current levels of planning applications that you're working on at the moment?
Okay, so well, in terms of education, we have two main strands to our work. One is further education, and one is state education, state schools. My particular focus is on the state schools, and we've had a very steady supply of work in those areas really now for the past 5 years, driven very much by two strands coming out of central government. The first is to provide more school places overall, which is a particular demand first in primary schools and then following through into secondary schools in London and the South East. Elsewhere in the country and also in London and the South East, there's been the need to replace what were outdated school premises, which had structural failings, which were beyond serviceable repair. So both those areas of work have kept us incredibly busy on planning applications over the last 5 years. I think it's been a fairly steady supply. I think if anything, there probably has been a peak in the last year and a half. And whilst obviously meeting new school places to meet growing population probably has another year or so in the pipeline, obviously the need to be replacing existing schools either on new sites or knock down and rebuild on the same site it is something which is going to be ongoing, I suspect, and there's certainly no indication that the Department of Education are looking to lessen the pressure in that aspect. Certainly during the COVID outbreak, whilst in many cases a lot of construction sites initially closed down, the direction from the Department of Education was that if possible, and if sites can be worked safely, then work should continue, for the simple reason that the school places are needed. And in many cases, particularly on the new schools, we are building or involved in building new premises for schools which are already existing and are operating out of temporary accommodation, which is far from ideal for anybody, and is also at the same time quite an expensive option. So in that sense, there really hasn't been any let-up in the drive to get consent and to build out the new schools.
And about your current pipeline, so there's no impact, as you say, on the current pipeline of projects. So COVID hasn't interrupted what's happening. So how has DPP and indeed local authorities overcome lockdown restrictions to keep the process going?
Okay. Well, we very early on we decided to start closing our offices and working from home, which is what we've done. We have an internal infrastructure which allows us to do that with a lot of all the information stored in the cloud. So it's quite easy to do, and touch wood, it's worked quite effectively. We've also found that most local authorities are also adapting to this new process quite well. Most planning officers are continuing to work from home. We are holding meetings with local authorities either via Zoom or via Teams, and we've even had planning committees and design review panels held in that way. So generally speaking, I think people have adapted to it quite well.
And do you think, and obviously the Department of Education would be very pleased with that, but obviously with this drive to keep the pipeline of school developments going, because some of these projects that you're working on now and these applications you're working on now will be for build out, starting to build for the education year starting in 2022. Is that right?
Right. Okay. So schools that are on site at the moment, I think the majority of them are probably for completion this September. There are some which are September 2021, and I think we have some going through planning at the moment, which will be for 2022. Now, those schools are all designed and are all designed, and in most cases, consent was granted pre-COVID-19. So, whilst always the Department of Education are looking at improving the school framework, and in particularly in areas of energy efficiency and energy policy, we're looking at evolving the process, and also ease of construction, going to modular and off-site construction methods.
Bob, we talked about before about how DPP and local authorities, and indeed all businesses, are changing how they're working. Do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic and what's come out of it will change the way that schools are designed and their layouts and how they operate, and how the planning process and the design process will have an involvement in that?
Right. At the present, I don't think there's been any particular discussion about that. And I think it depends on one's perception of the outcome of all of this. Hopefully there will be a vaccine discovered, and in a year's time, it'll be something which is manageable. Obviously, all the schools that are in the framework at the moment, they are all designed and all costed pre-COVID-19. And obviously schools that are on site at the moment. So I think in the short term, there may need to be operational changes when schools go back, whether that be from June or later in the year. And I think in terms of how the internals of schools are arranged, I think perhaps there might be a need for screening around desks, for example. But unless you're going to go down the route of building schools which are considerably larger in floor area, I'm not convinced that there's an effective way really of designing in a resilience against COVID-19 in the actual physical structure of the building. I think it's going to be more down to the fixture and fittings and the internal organisation of the space. And obviously, if we do have to go, and we do look on this as being a long-term thing that isn't going to go away, then I suspect there may need to be more of a fundamental rethink about the design of schools. But I think in the short term, it's going to be management, operational issues, possibly around different year groups going in different days of the week, etc., etc., and possibly looking to extend the school year as a result of that.
Bob, thank you very much for your time today. Look out on the DPP LinkedIn page for more videos like this as we go through in the coming weeks and months on a range of different subjects. Bob, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.